One of me stuttered, and one of me broke, and one of me tried to fasten a line to one of me, untying it from me. One of me watched a fisherman haul a sand shark from the breaker, while another was already years later, returned to where a local man baited for striper but landed a shark. One of me sat under olivine clouds, clouds of cerise, a courtesan sky, and one of me sunned himself as a child, imagining a fish rod turned fermata. One waved a sash of cornflower blue, one heard a windmill, one heard the wind, one waved goodbye to an imminent leftover love. And one strolled barefoot and naked, sunburnt across the nickel inhibitions of afternoon, tossing amber bottles at a smoke tree, the gun lake, swimming toward his family on the dock as twilight fell, as the same boy stayed behind to look at him swim. One believed a father could be killed by falling rock, and one woke up to find he'd only dreamt, although his father was dead, and one believed in a beautiful house not built by any hand. One promised nothing would break, and nothing did, and one saw breaking everywhere and could not say what he saw. It's a great, great pleasure to be here tonight to read at the University of Richmond. I spent some time in Richmond as an undergraduate at the College of William and Mary. It's not a city I know nearly well enough. I did spend one evening in your library waiting for a decision to be handed down, and I remembered that I thought the library was an amazingly gorgeous place, and I wanted to find out coming back if it was still as pretty as I thought it was. Indeed it is. Thank you, Brian, for having me. Brian has been by far the most important, most powerful, most vocal supporter of my work since I started writing, which was exactly at about the time Brian started writing. He is what's called, for me, an ideal reader, meaning that it's important to me that he see first drafts, second drafts, final drafts, so-called final drafts of everything that I write. He's been terribly affirmative, but by that I also mean he's the one person I can rely on to be an honest naysayer when there's something about a poem, or indeed everything about a poem, that just isn't working, and he'll tell me to throw it out. That's something that can't be overestimated in value. It's great to see a lot of friends here tonight. I would call them old friends, but friends don't get old. I mean, they get older as people, but they stay contemporaneous as friends, and it's great to see a lot of you whom I haven't seen for 10, 15 years in some cases. I'm aware that in the poem I just read, I substituted the word naked for the word sunburnt. I don't know what kind of Freudian slip that was, but I apologize for that. I'm going to read from two different books tonight. One of them is called By Reason of Breakings. It's my first book, and it's the book that some of the students in Brian's class who I had the privilege of meeting today have been working on. And it's composed of a lot of individual, discrete poems, which distinguishes it in part from the third book, the most recent book that I want to read from as well. This poem's called Vespers. Architecture it's not even in winter. Nor is it a draft of a river to be put away for a lover to polish up later after the nails have been paid. Nor is it the finished thing, even if it has the look of a finished thing. In winter, but it is not winter, it's almost a year ago, water that's moving cannot be called a trigger, but almost a need. Our bodies are not architecture, they're moving, they have been put away by October. A draft of an almost finished river is not a crow-blue cloud at the end of winter, but after accounts have been paid years later, a whisper is polished up to have the look of architecture. October has the look of a crow in a river. It's a year ago, our bodies are 4/5 water. Your body is polished up to have the look of moving water. Clouds are 4/5 of winter, but whatever is almost crow-blue or moving cannot be called architecture or put away for our bodies to polish up later. I did not say nails had been put away or paid for with our bodies' whispered accounts. I did not say fever or finished or after. I did not call winter a need. I never said I had been nailed to a river, even if you had the look of what's already left. For better or worse, I don't have very interesting things to say between my poems. I'm often feeling insecure about the fact that other poets I greatly admire have stories to tell between them, accounts of whatever inspiration struck to cause them to write the poem that they're about to read. I don't really write about anything, so it would be dishonest of me to invent a story that goes on between them. So I end up saying things like this to keep the conversation moving a little bit. This next poem is called "Where From the Shadows That Are Forms." It's a phrase I stole from a Robert Duncan poem, and the poem's in part a conversation with him. Escorting the immediate ornament of dream, it lingered past the absence it invoked, like a thunderstorm, decisive in its indifference, that over a folded, unfamiliar premise recast the decadent frieze allure had let go. Sharpening of caution along a branch, expansion into dark, elaborate fields, where, because it had not yet inquired, trees resisted wind that sounded of nothing, no place, nobody known, already other than why it was setting out. Closing in of clouds, forgotten forms, dusk erotic blue at the river's inflection, as if, by encountering its design, an end was reached before the terms were met. Across the outer suspicions of grass, teased by a razor moon, heavier for its weight against a hill, it stayed above an interior lit from within at the edge of sight, where we, because we lived there, were never at home. This next poem is a conversation between two voices. It's called Isotopes for Two Voices. I think you'll agree it's not the kind of conversation that two people actually have. I've never had a conversation quite like this. And it's in prose. It's a trio of prose poems. The first voice speaks, the second voice responds, and the third voice closes the dialogue. Isotopes for Two Voices. First voice. Let us concern ourselves. There was a proxy moon, embalmed in the Cinderella pond, unlearning iridescence under a stagnant, backward sky. Morning waited for weeks at slipped hinges, and we paused to listen for signs of an emptiness starting. Purposeful accidents followed wherever we went. You could tell by the damage done to the late evening air, even if what the satellites told us was wrong. Second voice. Rhetoric was calling a parachutist, that tree being drawn across grass, toward an afternoon it sketches and moves itself into, like a speaker walking ahead of her own words spoken. The sun and the man were one in their falling. The first made a shadow of the second possible. We might have been part of that slow composition if rack and pinion had not, in the end, accelerated to steel. We would wear nothing but open umbrellas to focus our eyes where the pilot went down. First voice. But to erase and to pray are the same in the mind of the motion, if flying is leaving behind a position once fixed, by which I mean that we too must go, separately, out of ourselves and each other, as a speaker, having spoken, exits her speech. There shall not be further blessing from one to another, for fear of the overhearings which only condemn. We must keep a more urgent appointment, burning this field of the wreck in its record, so the moon, when it gets here, is clean. As Brian said, I live in Georgia. I teach at the University of Georgia. I've written a poem called Georgia. It started as a translation of a poem called Georgia in a book by Philippe Soupeau called Georgia that was published in 1927. The poem was in French. It was not a very interesting translation that I rendered, although I love the poem. And I immediately started ripping it off and riffing on it, so it became a much longer affair pretty quickly. The poem was also written at a time when the University of Georgia circulated its firearm policy, its campus firearm policy. I didn't know we had one. This was before what happened at Virginia Tech. And I was rather appalled to read parts of it. The idea that we would need to have one to talk about who could carry what kind of weaponry where on campus and for what reasons struck me as deeply sinister, still does. So that was working on me as I thought about this translation that became my own poem. I'm only going to read about half of it. It's 24 pages long, and it would take up more time than we have. In any case, the poem contains all of the original lines by Philippe Soupeau, which are transmogrified in some other form in the poem. And I've also imported a couple other people who don't necessarily have anything to do with Soupeau, but they would include Charles Olson, Maurice Blanchot. You'll hear a little French phrase in here, which is ripped off from Blanchot, and Carson McCullers, who's become a deep interest of mine since moving into the South. Georgia. I don't sleep, Georgia. I shoot bullets into the dark. The blunt, mimeographic dark, the middle dark, Georgia, outside the outside. Whatever a ghost's front tooth is, Georgia, let alone ballistics, whatever pulls back the hammer, Georgia, coughing up sulfur and strobes of negate, I wait, Georgia. Think, Georgia. The fire is like the snow, Georgia. The snow wipes out a one-way street, puts nothing in its place. Snow is not like the snow, Georgia. One is theorem, the other will thaw. Night is the neighbor girl. She hangs her laundry, she sits on the step. The leaves on the tree in her yard are like florins. Her sliding door dress in a squall, Georgia. Her flowers, what is a flower, Georgia? A trace, what is trace? I listen to the noises, every last one, Georgia. I love every last noise on the violet fields. They bicker and click, the clamors, I mean, blur as if struck with a lucifer match. Guesswork, Georgia, netherlights joke, I see smoke, it rises, it quadrilles, Georgia. Tungsten, Georgia, sliver-tongued, the smoke is a little less smoke in the air. Little by little, Georgia, it comes to that, not even, Georgia. I walk wolf step into the shadow, Georgia, the nodding orchestral branches, shellacked as if a fountain turned and forced its gravity turn. The scuzzy drag queen dawn, Georgia, hours away from hours away. A motor idles, reverse in the drive, trompe-l'oeil frisking the shrubbery, Georgia. The high beams taper, the porch lamp expires, I take out the garbage, Georgia. Will it rain or snow? Will the weather, Georgia? The winter here is not your winter. It's pixeled, it's chien et loup, Georgia. A dum-dum blank to the clavicle, Georgia. Assassin crouched at the front of the house, assassin waiting in back. I don't give a shit, Georgia. Difference itself can differ, Georgia, and everything's different now. I buried a friend far away, Georgia, in France, Georgia. It wasn't funny, Georgia. We sat at a table, I kissed him goodbye. He turned around, never came back. Maybe you already heard it, Georgia. I'm tired of talking about it. That was then, and this is then, and not even, Georgia, not even. I listen, Georgia, to the racket, the clatter, the clangers clang if you hearken, Georgia, and that noise makes a noise if you, a peloton of din, Georgia, you have to sonar yourself. The question of is it, Georgia? The ranges are thrift store crinoline, Georgia. The stars are of mescal, Casbahs of tin, flayed. What is it to flay something, Georgia? Mountains unplugged, the moon flipped off. If music is cleaved from a flower, Georgia, if music cleaves to the flower, Georgia, live forever in purple clover, but nothing lives that long, Georgia, or even half that long. All things that are unlit, Georgia, black like lapis in a quitted room. The feedback, Georgia, the anvil's hymnal, a dial tone looped in a flophouse, Georgia, an explosive packed in a microchip, petals of 0, petals of 1, rips a hole of a fractal dimension, shrapnel, Georgia, collateral damage, call it what you will. Here is the road, the outskirts, Georgia. Here is a city, is the same city, and I don't know this city, Georgia, and I don't know if I want to know what is it that anyone knows, Georgia. Really, Georgia, in the end, Georgia. Some say your eyes are charcoal, Georgia. Some say siren, some gin. I don't say, Georgia, it isn't for me. I don't have a bone in my body. The unquick have a habit of loitering, Georgia. A bad one, I willn't say otherwise. It seems to get them through all right. Don't know what they see in it. As if they're awake, what is wakefulness, Georgia? With the silencer on, what is silence, Georgia? Someone around here will know, Georgia. Somebody ought to know something. The house next door has gone tattletale gray, its chimney a jigsaw of mortar and frost. Threadbare, nay barren, crash-tested Georgia, Rapunzeling up on a fidgety draft, the pine straw to flicker and parry, and the eglantine to wither Georgia, and snowflakes tatter the shutters Georgia, like flack from a showdown in Kelvin air. L'attente commence quand il n'y a Georgia, plus rien à attendre, ni même la fin de l'attente. That nothing come between us, Georgia, but me and you and the hollow between. I prune your buds, unbutton my ribs, pot you inside like a bonsai, Georgia. Buddha napping in tiny shade, Buddha at rest with an almsgiving bowl. It's aliment versus ailment, Georgia. I won't let you go it alone. You and your poor man's briar patch and your ne'er-do well, well, well. Heat lightning daubs the collodion hills, and a howling, and how close to the bone does it get, Georgia? Do you pull its pin with a cinch of the jaw, pulver its craw with a flinch of the fist? I hurry, here is the wind, and cold the inaudible decibel, the irises flushed in saffron, in bayonet red, in cymbeline. No clean angle, simulacra, Georgia. Everything's dirty and doubled, Georgia. I say, you can try to break it, it will break you. I say, everything is breakable, Georgia. Melody, Georgia, meltwater, a pressure, a femur, a fever, a wife. Syllables virused by syllables, Georgia. The bicycle is, the memory card is, the brackish canal where a boat is, Georgia, and the boat, and where is it headed, Georgia? The tanzanite dew of your nerve endings cuts me, keeps me alert. I unlatch the window, it sticks, Georgia. Sometimes I see past the paint flecks, Georgia, and sometimes the pain is the object I see. And sometime come a worrying, Georgia, like an alabaster lung, Georgia, a valentine stitched in Kevlar, Georgia, blown in Venetian glass. It's beautiful, Georgia, that's one word, like a landslide, like a negligee. Carnelian, Georgia, an impasse's path. The glass in the garden is bulletproof, but our bodies are not of glass, Georgia. Let's bloom, Georgia, this pop stand, this podunk 5 and dime a dozen, our brains all over the passenger seat, our underwear on the dash, desire from the formal idea thereof. I is a shotgun shell, Georgia. Imma and imminent, the image as such. Your quidditas throws a wrench in the work. But this engine runs on wrenches, Georgia. Anti-freeze and no egress, Georgia. Perugia stalled in a parking lot. The phenomenon's faulty ignition. You're alassless, Georgia. Harassless, Georgia. From your slack-ass jeans to your Jesus, Georgia. Ersatz and aliased, lacking a lack, sans any essence or pretense of presence. Your leeward, Georgia. A bejeweled word, Georgia, and fuck you anyway, vowellude, Georgia. Face card missing a face, Georgia. They're dead, Georgia. I said they were dead. I didn't say they weren't dancing. The clouds are low, they will tumble down, Georgia. I spread my arms, they get tired, Georgia. To catch them, Georgia, from shattering, Georgia. My eyes, they get tired, I don't shut them, Georgia. It's like this, Georgia, unlike this, Georgia. Between the bed and the kitchen, Georgia, one plate in another, one fag in another, the ashtray, the butane lighter, Georgia, an ice cube and its plastic cell, a pill and the pillow, whetstone and knife, one bag of coffee, one packet of creamer, an orange, a slice of bread, between the door and the hinge, Georgia, the razor blades in the bathtub, Georgia, a forest of goneness, a windrow of kindling, a forge nail hidden in grass. I don't cry, Georgia. You know what they say, whoever the they is who say what they say. But I was never real, Georgia. But the hell if I know what is. I'm a scarecrow, Georgia, a voodoo doll. No for a left leg, yes, yes for my right. It's calamity, Georgia. Flammable, Georgia. Piraplume scribbled all over the board. A torso of origami folds, crease for an eyelash, a Crayola head with a watermark, Georgia. 80 gram. You roll it, you lick it, you drag on it, Georgia. I don't say it ain't kitschy, Georgia, like cotton candy like holding hands. So you've had it up to here, huh? There isn't a soul who don't have it to here. The Android Floral and Cyanine, Georgia, Acacia version 2.0, the horizon a linen of spilled Anjou, of lint and candle wax. I call Georgia, my voice shot Georgia, parasite sur la ligne, Georgia. The flowers rattle, I listen the flowers, and the I am is that ruckus, Georgia. It's pretty, Georgia. That's a word comes to mind, a punk-ass word, but a word all the same. An adjective out of bric-a-brac, we let it return to its querulous hive. A heaven of stones whose swiftness, Georgia, made their separate orbits one, that slackening would fall. I call out, Georgia, because that you are whatever, Georgia. But it's dint, Georgia. Teflon, Georgia. Polycarbonate, it opens on impact, Georgia. Bureau raised to the second power with the safety off and the trigger rigged. I don't knock, Georgia. My brass knuckles buffed. With a rough like liquid oxygen and a pilot light and a fraying fuse, it's sugar, Georgia. Burnt, Georgia. Pure cane, Georgia, and maybe, baby, you're nothing more than synecdoche, Georgia. A piece of a shred, of a shard, of a frag. You're blitzkrieg, Georgia. Don't lady me, Georgia. I've got theremin lacing the bloodstream, George, and a spinning roulette for a ticker, George, a slug cocked snug in the six-shooter chamber, a 16.6% chance. You're a bitch, Georgia. A drill bit. By me, I mean third-person plural, Georgia. A lake effect, Georgia. All haggard-like, Georgia. A hangman, Georgia. A hanged man, Georgia. Here's a lullaby, Georgia. With geraniums, Georgia. There, Georgia. No, there, Georgia. And may your dreams be couturier sewn in pinafores and dainty furbelow. I actually like living in Georgia. I don't want to give the impression that I don't. And the Chamber of Commerce doesn't pay me to say that. But I'm not sure I liked it at the time. But that's the first half anyway. It doesn't really get happier as it goes on. I mean, it just keeps struggling back and forth. I think I substituted the word naked for sunburnt because it's part of that dream that people have, you know, that standing in front of an audience, you suddenly worry that you're like naked in front of everybody. And to reverse that, you're supposed to imagine that everybody else is naked, which is actually more horrifying in lots of ways. So I'm not thinking about you folks at all. I'm just doing my thing. This is called The Hour Between Midnight and Midnight. Was it the radical insufficiency, the snow in the rooms and walking from one to the other? Was it the iced-over pantomime of sleeping under a false set of stars, interrogating angels and getting nowhere? Was it how, in the imperfect wind-ordered arch of a neighbor's lake, the moonlit yard became a palindrome, a symmetry too still to allow us to enter, dancing as we were away from our private lives? Was it an unintended isomer or cloud cover to an intimacy colored just beyond the view our window afforded? Was it coming down the stairs unseen, and was there no way to stop it from stopping, to slow its intricate slowing? Or was it what we thought we heard, calling to us from below the arc lights, with us pretending to miss it? What else could it have been if not the hour between midnight and midnight, a meridian of suspended acoustics and torque, when you turned to me and, living it over, said these were the orchestrations of two glaciers fretting, but it would take more than that to see in the dark. This poem's called Agrapha, and it literally means the unwritten places from the Greek. Giving up isn't giving in, but a different kind of poverty. And if we didn't mention them all in order, it wasn't our fault. Our strength gave out before the daylight tapered. Schedules were strict, the weddings obliged to go forward, even with strangers involved, and sisters and mothers of strangers, playing Russian roulette with 5 bullets coughed into the chamber, and swallow the razor and other old parlor games. keeping appointments with overcoats and nautical charts of the crime, while bosses kept telling lies about factory bylaws, saying, "Don't be afraid, I have called you by name, you are mine," and almost believing it. Survivors peddling insomnia's cure, calculating which bridges to burn, which heretics, which beds. A package that never arrived from a mispronounced province, or a light switch left on overnight at the back of the hall, rehearsing the wreckage of telegrams, padlocks, and skeleton keys, and storms on the coast with other betrayers to please. Well, like the conversation that isn't a real conversation, this is called postcard, although obviously you would never send this postcard to anyone. I never did send this postcard to anyone. I don't know what they would think if they got a postcard that said this. But it's a poem, it's not a postcard. So this is into extremity poised, and that was staying more or less the same. The difference was frost on the property wire, to say nothing of the trains I'd heard before. And listen, the girl saying no stopped to tell me how everything keeps going by. Burnt grass is cracking again in the wind, the orchard renouncing its name and its pallor, for someone to copy on wet sand or bone and leave for the others to read when the weather gets better. I don't know if I told you or not, but what I found that day in the half-light out where the apples were done for the year has given no end to the road twisting down from the house, and I've spent a good part of mornings just watching for day. It's still strange to me that the ocean returns, that lungs will not hold less than what they need. But there was fire in a clearing, under a razor blue sky before dusk, and I almost couldn't believe that in-gathered air, as if I'd forgotten my hunger, the clearing, smoke, and the smell of the smoke. Those lines don't fit, I have to hold the book a different direction. It's the secret weapon in the book. The last poem I'll read is called Ampere Sonata. The title is composed of a couple different words, obviously ampersand and persona in sonata. And it was written for a friend who passed away in August of 1998, named Julia Zelmanovich. Ampere Sonata. In day not breaking, but already broken, and someone holding another to privilege day. And beauty is for the living, at the perimeter, not the last, and look, so quiet we hear each other think. In a lake that fell off the edge of the eye, and clearing away the rubble, and clearing away the rubble, in days of grace, moments of anguish, of course, and I don't understand, I understand. And praise without, and do not look back, and call it leaving the lights off, or leaving the lake for another lake, and accommodate the faint and forfeiture, and do not look. And nothing else will trade places again, and not only waving, but waving again, and accept. In what will never be seen, never known at the edge of the eye, and water purling in carrots to cover the mirror, and memoirs of air, and memoirs of, and eavesdropping on the eyelids of morning, and light, and less than light, even so, even so. Thank you very much for listening.